Hello there, and welcome to our quick tutorial on how a PC works. Our video will show you what basic components make up a computer, and then, with the help of a small program made in C#, show you what each of the major components do. Now we're going to show you what the computer roughly looks like, but outside of the case. So first off, we have the motherboard. This is home to all the chips and electrical pathways that connect everything together, such as DVD and hard drive, not currently shown, to everything else. These days it usually has the devices that also control sound, networking, printers, keyboards and mice built into it. This is the processor. This is the part that manipulates data, sends out control signals to the rest of the computer, and executes commands. It can run quite warm, so a heatsink and fan are usually needed to keep it cool. Then we have RAM. This is where the data that is currently being accessed by the processor is stored. This can be from 1 GB up to 32 GB depending on the PC setup. And finally, this is the graphics card. It is usually housed in a daughterboard like this, but can sometimes be found built into the motherboard. This device converts data for the display into signals that the monitor can understand, and then sends them out so that the monitor can then display it.
Now we are going to show how the computer goes through a small program. First, the computer will load the program into the memory. The computer will then pull out the first line of code and execute it. For this line, input age will then be allocated space in the memory by the CPU. An internal CPU counter will then increase by 1. The CPU will then fetch the next line of code. This line works the same as the last. The cycle starts again. Internal counter plus 1, the next line is fetched and executed. The write line command tells the CPU to send the string to the graphics card. Cycle continues. An internal CPU counter will increase by 1. The CPU will then fetch the next line of code. This line of code asks the CPU to wait for an input and puts it into the memory slot called input age. An internal CPU counter will then increase by 1. The CPU will then fetch the next line of code. This will tell the CPU to convert the data in memory, the ASCII code for 14 into binary 14. An internal CPU counter will then increase by 1. The CPU will then fetch the next line of code. In this line, the CPU will fetch the variable from memory, for example 1110, and divide by 0111, and will then put the new value back into the dog age memory space. An internal CPU counter will then increase by 1. The CPU will then fetch the next line of code. This will fetch the dog age contents and combine with text and send to the graphics chip. Program ends. Memory contents of RAM will clear when the power is removed. This is the fetch execute cycle in a nutshell, as we fetched an instruction and executed it. In conclusion, we've just seen what the major parts of the computer are and what each part does when you run a program. We've seen what and where the processor is, what and where RAM is, and how it all connects. We've also seen what the computer is doing at what part of the program. I hope you have enjoyed our tutorial and found it useful. Goodbye.